a mechanic. We could have trained them to the highest standard, but then you put them in the workshop and somebody turns up and goes, "Can you repair my car?" And they don't have the parts. Now they're going to underperform. Now, that's not intentional. That's not by design necessarily. What we want is to make sure when I turn up with my car, I've got the parts.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Ricky from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Mark from Thinking Focus.
And today, the question is, are we setting our people up to fail? So this podcast is the third in a 4-part series that explores several aspects which affect the productivity of our people. So Mark, are we setting our people up to fail?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I don't think anybody does this intentionally, but it can happen. And it can happen for a number of reasons. We've looked in the first 2 sessions of these podcasts on the knowledge to perform and what's required and the skills that are essential to turn that knowledge into performance in role. But there are aspects of who we are as an organization that even if we've provided people with the knowledge and the skills, that we can still be setting them up to underperform based on what we provide for them to do the job with and the culture we create in which they are asked to work.
I think that's really interesting. I think, it's kind of obvious that if you've got a sales role, for example, a field-based sales role, they're probably going to need some transport. If you're going to ask them to get on a train or a bus to get to their meetings, they're probably not going to be as productive as you would like. They're probably going to need a phone and a laptop in order to stay connected and keep up to date with information, access records, customer records, update customer records. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? After a meeting, so there's fundamental basics. I mean, let's just take a really interesting example. I think a mechanic. We could have trained them to the highest standard. We could have, demonstrated skills. They're very accomplished. But then you put them in the workshop and somebody turns up and goes, "Can you repair my car?" And they don't have the parts. Now they're going to underperform at that point in time. Now, that's not intentional. That's not by design necessarily. What we want is to make sure when I turn up with my car, I've got the parts. I think you had an example with your son, Jonathan, didn't you?
Yeah, so he decided, against my better judgment, that he wanted to change the discs and the pads on the front of his car himself.
Oh, no.
So I did the typical dad thing, which was tell him all the reasons why he shouldn't. But then when it was clear that he was going to do this himself, I did then ask a few other people about what's likely to trip us up. And one of the things that they said is you probably need a breaker bar to remove the caliper bracket in order to change the disc. And so I let Jonathan know this. So he had the knowledge. Having watched a few YouTube videos, he decided he had the skills to be able to do it. But he set off...
That sounds safe.
Well, it does, but he set off with some observation, some supervision and assistance from myself. But he set off to do the job without the breaker bar. And when we got to that part of the procedure, then, of course, it all ground to a halt because he couldn't remove those caliper bolts. Only when we were borrowed them off the person that had said he will need one of these was he then able to complete the task effectively and 10 days on, apparently safely, that he was able to complete the task. So yeah, you might know what tools you need, but if you don't have them to hand at the right time, you're still going to underperform.
And I think these are probably a little bit easier to see, a little bit easier to kind of surface. Probably a bit more challenging is the cultural aspects. Because the culture that we exist in can create an environment whereby we probably don't perform at our best because we're scared of failing, scared what that will look like. We're fearful of the reaction if we, take sales as a great example. If we turn up at the end of the week or the end of the month and we haven't achieved our number, that's likely to trigger what we would describe as unhelpful thoughts. These are thoughts that probably they probably constrain the way we act. They probably limit the way we perform because we don't want to perform. And if you are in that, you almost have a paralysis because you go, I don't want to fail. And actually the self-fulfilling prophecy is that you end up failing because you're not performing, or because the environment, the cultural dynamics of the environment you operate in is failure is not an option. We have to deliver, and therefore, I'm not likely to take risks. Then, am I?
That is entirely true, and you do see that in the sales environment. I've seen it a lot. If there is a culture of fear within a sales team, two things can happen. Number one is people will deny that an opportunity exists, because if they state that there's an opportunity potentially there, but then they can't realize it, it's then perceived in their mind, that unhelpful thinking of we've failed to deliver against it. And so people will narrow their field, so to speak, to be able to perform. And because they'll say things, well, that particular customer has got the competitor in their DNA. They're far too close. Nobody will ever convince them to do anything else. We're in denial of the opportunity. But that denial can come from the culture of if I say I'm going to do this and then don't, then the fear culture that exists around that can be really unhelpful and restrict people's willingness to try. I think the second part of a competitive sales culture, which you see in lots of other walks of life as well, is where people in your own team perceive you as the competition. And that, if you're creating that environment as a sales leadership team, as a management team, then you won't get the sharing of best practice and the good ideas, which then allow the broader team to perform. You get the high-flying eagles who keep their secrets to themselves. And that's a cultural situation where we are actually setting the other people up to fail, because we're not learning from the successes of those high performers and disseminating that information and giving them all of the knowledge and the tools that they might need to replicate that performance. So internal competition is a really damaging cultural aspect that can underperform or create underperformance within the team.
A good example of your high performer, what did you call them? The Golden Eagles?
The high flying eagles.
High flying eagles. Well, quite often organizations unknowingly have broken processes, and your high flying eagles are adept at working a way around it. However, your perhaps inexperienced, newer people, or perhaps less confident people, they kind of muddle through with a broken process. So they struggle, they stumble, they stall. And of course, the high flying eagles go, no, we just get around it. We'll do it this way. But perhaps don't share that, perhaps don't articulate that for the rest of the group unless directly asked. So it's not forthcoming. So you end up with two things. A, you got a broken process that is screwing most of your people over. And two, you got people who've worked around it that probably are off process and adds risk. None of which leads to what you really want, which is a process that works, that everybody can follow and feel comfortable and confident with.
Yeah, and there's a real sense of unfairness about that, because you'll have people who are confident and are knowledgeable, but they have a set of values that say, I play by the rules and I do things right. And the things that they would like to get done don't get done because those others are circumventing the system and effectively jumping the queue.
Yeah, or
And
they're scared to step out of process. So
absolutely.
they might, that you might have those that are, I follow the rules, that's what I've been trained to do, or actually I feel that I daren't. The consequences might be too severe for me.
Absolutely. And if you're not constantly reviewing those bottlenecks and those processes that are essential for being productive as an organization, you won't solve that cultural space, which means some people might continue to underperform, not through their own fault.
I think the cultural one's really interesting. I remember when in my early career, and that I'm going back a long way, as you will know, but in my early career, I moved from a traditional bank. I worked in financial services. I moved to a building society. And this is in the kind of transference from traditional banking, where you had your current account and all the rest of it, to where banks were starting to wake up to the fact that actually we can sell other products and services here. And of course, building societies had already switched on to this, particularly the one I joined. And the cultural difference and expectation that went from a service driven model that I was in to a very sales and service driven model made me really uncomfortable. And it made me, almost go, this isn't right for me. I'm in the wrong place. And I could easily have walked out. There were several times where I thought, this isn't for me. I'm going to leave. I'm going to find something different. But there was no outlet for me to have that conversation. And the expectation was that I just get on with it. I don't surface those types of thoughts. And actually, when somebody's new, that's probably at the point where they're probably most at risk of the culture consuming them or rejecting them. And for me, I just had this, I can't quit, I can't give up. And I pursued and I kind of persevered with it and came out, doing well and moving through the ranks. But it was a really close call as to whether I made it through that. And it was such a transformation between culture A and culture B that caused me to go, am I in the right place? Do I feel safe to be able to say this? No, I didn't. Do I feel that I could lean on anybody? I didn't. And some people might well have gone, this isn't for me, and left. And I think that clearly was the case for a number of people.
Yeah, and I think there's another set of circumstances where that can happen as well. And in the world we live in today, it happens more and more. And that's acquisition. When a business is bought by another business, and then there is a very rapid change in culture. Because everything gets harmonized in one direction or the other. So where different teams are brought together under a single roof or a parent company, and there are some standardized way of doing things that might have worked for that group, but we're a slightly different organization and it doesn't quite fit. There are examples of that, and I experienced that as part of a medical device business owned by a pharmaceutical business. Parts of that didn't work well for the medical device sector. And so there has to be room for adjustment and adaptation. So, yeah, mergers and acquisitions can create that same cultural shift that suddenly makes people feel unsafe. When they feel unsafe, two things happen. They lose confidence in the organisation, and therefore they tend to be less brave in what they're doing in role. And secondly, that feeling of lack of safety makes them question their own ability.
And of course, a changing manager can also create some of that as well, can't it? Because now the manager has different expectations, higher expectations, may have different processes they want you to follow, or a different way of doing the role than you were doing before. So sometimes that can have a similar effect. So in essence, change can impact how we respond to the culture. So where do you see people who do their bit only for the other teams to let them down? So you've got a situation where maybe I'm performing. Sales is a great one for this, for example, where I'm performing, the rest of the team aren't performing, and you're my manager and you go, can you do some more?
I think there are a number of aspects we could look at this. I mean, even if you just get in, the whole world opens up around target setting. Is it fair to set everybody the same target in a sales team? Or do you ask different people to deliver more based on experience, circumstances, the opportunity spread? And, you can argue those things both ways. You get situations where the goalposts get moved as well, maybe by senior leadership. Something as simple as the exchange rate changing might mean to deliver your contribution back to the corporate organization that the actual baseline target has to move. So that happens a lot. And it's how you position it as well. And as a manager, that is a really challenging piece to do, where suddenly you turn around and say, we need to do something additional. We need to make up the gap. The key part of that is saying, okay, and we talk about safety a lot, Ricky, and sometimes we can feel like a broken record. But the primary way in which we can get a constructive conversation in those moments is when we say, as a team, how could we do this? What options do we have? What are the possibilities here in order to close those gaps? And have it as an open conversation rather than as almost in isolation as a manager, make some decisions on your own and put the pressure on you to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to ask this person for this and this person for that. The more we can create that safe discourse where I said, as a team, this is what we need to deliver, then sometimes we might need to resource things differently. And that might mean moving someone off their territory and onto somebody else's in order to drive a particular opportunity which is there for the taking today. And that's all about resourcing things. So, we've talked about culture and environment. We've talked a little bit about tools early doors today, but I think resourcing is broader than that. We have to be flexible, both as an organization, as a manager, and as the people in our teams, to say, how do we best utilize the skills, the abilities, the know-how we have in the team to maximize the opportunity for the whole rather than just for the single individual?
Totally agree with that. I think the other aspect of that, of course, is we need to find a way of being consistent as well, because, quite often we will treat our top performers, we will hold them to a different standard than those that are probably either just scraping by or underperforming. And we create an inequity because actually, behaviourally, you might be a nightmare, but because you're performing and other people aren't, I let you off. I don't hold you to account. And now the other people see, well, what's the point? Because, they can break the rules. I'm not allowed to break the rules. That's not fair. And again, all of this takes focus away from doing the things that we really need them to do, which is focusing on performing, improving, developing, growing, and ultimately delivering against the goals and objectives that we have as individuals.
Yes, it's Mark being Mark syndrome, and that's the excuse that's given to kind of go, yeah, we know that's just Mark being Mark, ignore him. It is not a way to manage and handle that situations, because it breeds unfairness. When people feel unfairness, it's a waste of emotion that they could be put into constructive things, and it does undermine performance because people say, well, why should I?
So, what can managers do to set people up to win as opposed to fail? What can we do to help our people?
Well, that conversation on safe space to learn, safe space to fail, to try things and kind of go, we think there's an opportunity here. This is what we might have to do to realize it, but we're going to give it a go. And just allow the fact, especially in a sales context, crikey, you're never going to win maybe half the things you pitch at. So we're all humans after all. We're going to get things wrong. Let's not create a culture of fear around maybe not succeeding all the time.
Good point. I think, for me, number 2 in our list would be thinking about my example of moving from organisation A to organisation B. How do we make sure that the people we do recruit are going to fit in the culture that we have? How do we surface that up front, make sure that they are comfortable coming into the culture? Let's be open, let's be transparent about what it means to work here and the expectations of an individual, so they come in ready to hit the ground running in terms of their development.
Totally agree, Ricky. Get the expectations right on what the culture really is, rather than the one you would like it to be, and that can change over time. But fundamentally, the final piece is you've got to give people the tools, give them access to the tools and resources to do the job effectively. And there's a little piece here which says, links back to our first in this series, is do they then know how to use them effectively as well? So it can loop back onto the knowledge piece. So make sure they've got the tools and the resources to do the job effectively in combination with the other departments and teams they will need to work with.
And fix your broken processes.
Fix the broken processes.
Because your people will normalise them and you'll never know about them.
Next time on The Question Is.
Mindset can be one of two things. It can be our best friend and help us to perform. It can help us to move forward. It can help us to drive our performance. Or alternatively, our mindset can actually be our own worst enemy. In other words, we start to imagine a future of failure. We start to imagine everything going wrong. We start to imagine customers complaining, or, if I'm in a sales role, not buying.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.